Order. Good afternoon. Welcome to your Innovation, Grants, Technology, Commerce, and Trade Committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Bonin, Krikorian, and Mr. Buscaino, I believe, is on his way. We have a couple of items I wanted to take on consent, but we have a number of public comment cards. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through those items first, and if we have public comment cards on those items, then we will take them up. So item number 1, we have Antonio Ramirez. Is she here? No? Okay. Mr. Pig, Pepita Pig on item number 1. Not here. And Mr. Herman on item number 1. The record reflect all three folks have been called, and actually the same names are on for items 2, actually for all the items, but for the items I want to do on consent are items 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Is there any objection to doing those items on consent?
Move the items.
Okay. And Mr. Buscaino is here. Let him reflect that he's here. We've called the public comment cards on those items. Let the record reflect that none of the folks who registered for public comment for those items are here, so we're going to go ahead and take those items on consent. And we will now move, so items number 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 are approved on consent. So we will now move to item number 3. Would you please read item number 3 into the record, Mr. Espinosa?
Item number 3 is a report from the Economic and Workforce Development Department relative to the status of the Los Angeles waterfront market feasibility study.
Great. First, I'll do public comment cards on this item. Mr. Herman, Pepita Pig, and Antonio Ramirez. Let the record reflect they are not here. Public comment on that item is closed. And I'd like to invite Mr. Kaplan and Tiflon Rice Evans to the table. And along with Sam Hughes from Economic and Workforce Development. Sam.
Good afternoon.
Mike Galvin?
What's that?
Mike Galvin from the port?
Yeah. If you're prepared, I didn't have you on my list, but
That's
please.
the safe spot.
Yes, absolutely. No way. Anyone who's here for part of the presentation, please come up.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sam Hughes, EWDD. Before you today is the LA Waterfront Public Site Opportunity Analysis prepared by EPS, but just in advance of having Andrew Kaplan provide the highlights of the analysis, just by way of reference, I'd like this committee to know that in the first quarter of 2015, the LA City Council directed EWDD in collaboration with the Harbor Department to retain a consultant to conduct a real estate and market analysis and evaluate opportunities and constraints of development on public and privately owned property along the waterfront and in downtown San Pedro. Pursuant to the instructions, EWDD prepared and released a request for proposals and subsequently selected economic and planning systems to perform the work. The report includes a discussion of the 16 opportunity sites, an assessment of the market context influencing new development potential, an analysis of the feasibility of 5 representative prototypes, uses under current and potential future market conditions, and a technical appendix certainly backing data for the feasibility study. And today we have Mr. Andrew Kaplan of EPS, and I'm certain he's delighted to present the report to this committee. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon. Next slide, please. Unless there's a clicker for me.
It should be down by Mike.
I'm going to move to the working mic. I have a 20-minute presentation here, and hopefully we have a couple minutes for Q&A after that. divided into 5 parts. I'll give you a quick overview of who we are and what the provenance of the study was. A little bit on the underlying background conditions that will inform development potential. Then we'll drill down a little bit more into some of the specific sites and the market considerations that will guide their development potential. Some conclusions and a little time for Q&A after that. As Sam mentioned, all of this comes from a study we've prepared, which is technical analysis, and there's a lot of backing data for everything. Hopefully we'll stay out of that for now, but it's available to you. So again, commissioned by the Economic Workforce Development and Council District 15 and the Mayor's Office for Economic Development. I'm with Economic and Planning Systems. We're a land economics consultancy, and we are assisted by CDNA, who are an urban design firm and urban planning firm. The purpose of this study, I've attempted to distill into an overall question, which I think captures what we tried to get at right here. For 16 publicly owned sites in the LA waterfront area, what are the best near and longer-term development options given market conditions, zoning codes, regulatory constraints, physical site characteristics, and the ongoing public and private investment in the LA waterfront? Our approach, three phases. We gathered data, both primary and secondary source data. We did a lot of interviews. We looked at a lot of reports. We did a lot of site reconnaissance. And then we identified priority uses by synthesizing that data. We considered market support, again, the physical site characteristics and co-location attributes, and the extent to which zoning and Thailand's trust restrictions inform potential uses. And then we did some financial feasibility analysis on near and medium-term uses. So, area context. In order to really understand the opportunities here, it's really important to step back and look at the larger LA waterfront initiative, which I'm sure you're all very aware of. What this chart here does shows both existing and proposed public and private investment going into the LA waterfront. So to date, we have roughly $330 million that have gone in, and we've parsed this data by sort of public and private and land use category. So as you can see, commercial public uses and public space uses have garnered the largest amount of investment up to the state. And what we're really looking forward to in this investment scheme is an awful lot of commercial private development. The 2 key projects in that private development investment are San Pedro Public Market and Alta Sea. I won't go deep into these because I think you're very familiar with them, but they, the first aims to redevelop Ports of Call into an entertainment retail destination. Phase 1 is, which is a 30-acre portion of it, is hopefully arriving in 2020. Alta Sea is a redevelopment of City Dock Number 1 as a research and marine innovation center, and its Phase 1 is scheduled for somewhere between 2018 and 2020 completion. So these 2 projects could have a very big impact on visitation and on employment in the area. And we did some very conservative projections of that, and I'm showing them right here. What we estimate conservatively is that by 2025, if the build-out happens as scheduled, there could be almost a doubling of visitation, mainly to the Ports of Call project, but also to Alta Sea. So that would be 2 million more visitors per year. And also, these projects could generate over roughly 1,300 new full-time jobs in the area. Most of those are for Alta Sea, but a fair number of them are also from the Ports of Call project, from San Pedro Public Market. So this is the same investment schedule, but cut a different way. What you're seeing here is how this investment distributes over 4, what we consider 4 pretty distinct geographies. The Outer Harbor, downtown, Wilmington, and the Cruise Center areas. And up to date, the $330 million that's been spent so far has been pretty evenly distributed, more of it in the Outer Harbor area. But going forward, Outer Harbor in particular, but also downtown, should generate a lot of new investment. So this is all really to say that there's been a lot of money spent on the Port of LA initiatives. there's quite a bit more coming, and they should be, they could very well be transformative. This is a geographical dispersion of existing and pipeline projects. It's really just to show you how spread out they are. The projects in blue have already been completed. The projects in purple are pipeline. And we found that when we looked at the 16 public sites, they distributed into what I've described as these 4 geographical areas. So from the bottom, that's the Outer Harbor area. The middle one is the downtown area. Above that is the cruise ship terminal area. And finally, north of that is the Wilmington area. And I'm not going to go deep into this, but I just want to describe a little further what the sites were. 5 sites in the Outer Harbor, 4 of which are owned by the Port of LA owned. And for them, given the Outer Harbor's location, which is a little bit distant from a lot of the traffic, the Althusy project is a very important catalyst for development of those sites. In downtown, they are mainly City of LA owned sites. 6 of them, most of them are parking lots. And for these sites, residential is the most logical use. There's been some developer activity in this area, developer interest, but we do think the Ports of Call redevelopment, San Pedro Public Market, could possibly accelerate that interest. The final 2 areas are a little more long-term in terms of their development potential. The cruise ship area really is dependent in part on how that cruise terminal evolves, whether prior volumes can be recaptured or whether or not. And finally, the Wilmington area it's really a separate economic geography. It is part of the Avalon Corridor Specific Plan effort, and its redevelopment potential really is connected with actions happening in Wilmington as well as some Port of LA investments there. Those are longer term in nature. In the next section, I'll go into a little more detail in the various forms of market support that might be available and what impact it may have. A very rough table. I'm just going to say what it summarizes here is that some of the sites we looked at have really strong, viable uses, and their redevelopment will not probably happen anytime soon. So we kind of tag those as sort of hold sites, future, and to stay as they are. And then a number of sites are in the Tideland Trust area. And Tideland Trust Zone sites, their uses are limited. Limited for a variety of reasons, but mainly residential can't go in there, and a lot of office possibly can't go in there as well. So this helped us narrow our focus. For residential development, we found a number of very positive attributes that the area has in talking with developers and looking at the data. Authenticity, walkability, improving amenities, the LA waterfront pipeline, and the fact that the San Pedro sites have potential to be a lower cost alternative to residential developments in other oceanside cities. And also, housing in San Pedro has largely rebounded from the recession as it has throughout the county. And these attributes have led to some real pipeline. There are 804 units planned for downtown, in the downtown area. They are, a few of them are townhome style. The others are more ambitious multifamily projects, a wrap project and a high-rise project. However, we looked at rents and we found that current rents really don't support this kind of development. But it seems quite clear that these developers are betting on the come. They're really betting on that this new development, coupled with all the LA waterfront activity, will help them achieve the rents they need to make these projects feasible. So to summarize the residential section, desirable location attributes, and even though current rents aren't supportive, developers are anticipating that they will be able to build to that future expected rent. We also looked a bit at office potential. The market is modest for some pretty clear reasons. There's a small day population. Most workers who live in San Pedro actually outcommute. The city lost some key aerospace tenants over the past 20 years, and as a result, rents are lower than the county and city average. Actually, inventory has shrunk quite a bit over the last 10 years or 15 years at this point, compared with the area average and the county average. However, we do think that Alta Sea and Port Sakal can be real catalysts for a stronger future office market in the area. 700 jobs at Alta Sea could create a new industry cluster. San Pedro Public Market could provide a great set of amenities for office workers. And we're already seeing a little bit of developer interest in the renovated Topaz in downtown San Pedro, which is the only Class A space in the city in San Pedro, which has been redone in a sort of creative office style in anticipation of more high-tech kind of job tenants. Finally, it's a unique location. Unique, interesting locations are an attribute sought out by all kinds of employers, in particular high-tech employers like that for their tenants, for their customers. We also looked at hotel. A number of positive attributes to remark on. Overall county hotel performance has created a spillover effect that has influenced occupancy at San Pedro hotels. And they also get a little bit of spillover from the Long Beach Convention Center. However, San Pedro hotels have traditionally relied pretty heavily on the Port of LA cruise business. And as this chart here shows, that since 2005, the cruise business has declined quite a bit. And whether or not some of that volume can be clawed back is unclear. The future of the cruise business will be an important factor in generating future demand for new hotel growth in San Pedro. But as with the office, Alta Sea and San Pedro Public Market could provide a boost to these traditional sources of hotel demand, business traveler demand for Alta Sea, and tourism demand for San Pedro Public Market. This is a summary of what I've just said. Short-term concerns about cruise level volume, long-term Alta Sea and San Pedro Public Market could have a positive effect on demand and maybe generate new hotel development. So some general conclusions here. We found from our feasibility study that townhome condominium development is quite viable in the downtown area from a pure market economics perspective. That is, current rents that people are paying and home values that they're paying for condos would support townhome development. But as I noted earlier, some of the more ambitious, higher density multifamily development is not supported right now by current market rents, but there are developers who are willing to take that risk and to be there with their developments when rents improve. The San Pedro Public Market, Alta Sea, the potential to boost visitation and employment could support new hotel and office development. But again, we do think that Alta Sea and San Pedro Public Market are probably preconditions for that to happen. And finally, the Wilmington sites, as I noted earlier, are really part of a separate economic geography, and the success of those is connected a little more with activities in Wilmington. This last table I'm going to put up here, I'm going to leave it here on this. It's quite dense. But what it shows is that for each of the 16 sites that we looked at what we thought, what we decided was the key catalyst to future development of them, what the likely timing of that development would be, given all the factors I've discussed, and what potential uses there may be on those sites. And those recommended uses are both reflect market support and the physical and regulatory conditions also that characterize them. And so at this point, I'm happy to answer some questions. I'm going to leave this slide up here for now.
Great. Well, I'll start the questions with a question about that slide, actually. So in terms of recommendations of things that the city should be doing to help incentivize this kind of growth, aside from making those catalysts happen, are there other things that, through your studies, that you think that the city should be doing?
I think the city is doing, I mean, certainly I'm impressed by how much the city is doing in supporting these two mega projects. So because we saw these as being really critical catalysts for parts of this redevelopment to happen, anything you could do to support those projects and help them move along through their entitlement process, and I know there's a lot of lease negotiation happening as well. Those are pretty important pieces. When we did some feasibility analysis for the residential uses, several of those sites are city-owned parking lots, and replacing existing parking in those new developments presents a pretty big hurdle to market rate redevelopment of those sites. So I'm not suggesting that, I mean, parking is a whole separate big question, and how much should a city provide is a different issue. I just say from an economic perspective, it burdens those developments quite a bit.
Who drives nowadays?
What's that?
Who drives?
Who drives? Well, in the future, 5 years from now, maybe we will all be taking autonomous vehicles. But in the meantime, one other question, then I'm going to turn it over to Joe because I know he's chomping at the bit on this one. In terms of the community, was the community viewpoints any part of this analysis in terms of what folks are excited about or where there might be pushback? And Joe probably knows this just intrinsically, but was that part of the study at all, looking at, in terms of the opportunities, where the pushback and where the invitation would come?
We met with the Chamber of Commerce, San Pedro Chamber of Commerce, and we met with stakeholders, landowners, developers, business owners. We didn't meet with the larger community. We did, although we did present this information at a public meeting, a presentation very close to this one in December, I believe. And so, we engaged with the stakeholders in developing these findings, the landowners and the land use professionals, and so we got their input on that. They are very excited about anything that will help San Pedro evolve. Quite a few of them have been hoping for this for, and active in it for 20 plus years. So from the business and land developer community, there's a lot of enthusiasm. I think Dave and Sam can maybe speak to how the community responded when we spoke to them in December. I didn't detect any big pushback on it, but, maybe you guys have a different thought on that. I mean, people were excited by it, it seemed. It helped that there was a developer who also presented at that meeting, who presented a really nice vision for one of the downtown parcels. And so people were excited, it seemed.
All right, well, with that, I'll turn it to the people of the community's representative, Joe Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, to answer your question, the harbor area communities have been thirsting for a waterfront that not only provides jobs, access, but also amenities. Because oftentimes we compare ourselves to other ports across the country. And you heard me say this in this committee: Baltimore, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle. In fact, just last night someone posted on Facebook, "Why not us?" And this is something I've been saying for the last 5 years. Why not us? What this document before us gets us to be a port, a waterfront that would be equitable to the ports that I mentioned earlier. And thank you, Andrew, for the support and the report. To Mike Galvin, representing the Port of Los Angeles, and also Sam Hughes from EWDD. This has also been an ongoing effort. The mayor and I really has prioritized transforming our waterfront and our downtowns in San Pedro and Wilmington. He's put the people in place, like the port director and the harbor commissioners, that believe in investing in their communities. And Gene always says, when the port succeeds, the communities succeed and they thrive. So really want to applaud Mayor Garcetti, and also he also took it further in creating a task force on waterfront development by having all the department heads at the table, and this was one of the efforts being made here. So appreciate the report. a lot more needs to be done. In fact, Mr. Corey and I were speaking soon after council ended today, and it's like we don't have enough time. There's not enough time in the day to get things done here. And this reminded me that you set a path forward. This creates a blueprint to bring investment. Now, we valued the private investment coming into town. Whether, it's on Avalon, the investments on Avalon, Wilmington. You have Holland Partners building out 550. Wayne Blank, who's invested millions on the redevelopment of both Warehouse 9 and 10. Crafted is booming. LA's newest, hippest brewery is Craft Brewery West. This has taken off. Pappy's coming into downtown Pedro, working now alongside our supervisor Janice Hahn with the development of the county courthouse. But I've always said, let's do everything we can to develop the properties that we control, such as these parking lots. So we have a pathway forward. And also we've heard through the negotiations with the Rakovich Company how the San Pedro Public Market almost didn't pencil out because of limited lease terms. And once I heard that, I took it, I partnered with State Senator Isidore Hall. He introduced SB 399. Got the governor to sign it. Now we have to go through a process to ensure that our city ordinance, our city charter mirrors that state law by going to the ballot March 7th on Measure P. So I know it's a technical, dry amendment before the voters, but this will, by amending the city charter, will pave that way for a successful waterfront development in Wilmington and San Pedro. So I do also want to commend David Roberts for also working with the team here before you, colleagues, and know that we need to do more, and more is coming, so that we can say that we are like San Francisco, Seattle, and other parts of the country. To hear Alta-C moving forward, and I know the two projects, as you indicated, is the San Pedro Public Market and also Alta-C. Alta-C recently brought in and expanded the footprint of SpaceX with their Falcon 9 landing on the barge there, and also Boeing coming in to Alta-C by securing an MOU with Boeing. You see what Mike Bonin has done in his district on creating that Silicon Beach, and we want to be known as a Silicon Harbor so that we diversify the workforce and bring in added investment to the waterfront. The Cruise Center, I want to ask, and maybe Mike can chime in on the Cruise Center, because that is a huge piece of property that's being used throughout the year for parking. What do you foresee the future of the cruise terminal there? Because again, we want to capture those passengers that come and go, and either have them come a day earlier or stay a day later. What's the future of the cruise terminal today? Where do you foresee it going?
From our perspective, it's a pretty critical piece of our future redevelopment, but a piece that doesn't come until we really energize other pieces that are ready to go now, but it's something that we're looking at. What this study has really allowed us to do is to focus our resources on the two projects that are ongoing right now, and continue to flow resources into making sure that San Pedro Public Market and Alta-C continue forward and are healthy and have all the tools that they need to be really successful. The next step is to look at the next three most likely, which is Cabrillo Way Marina, Warehouse 1, and the cruise terminal. And so we are currently in contract negotiations with two real estate companies similar to EPS to look at that analytically and to go through the details of how we would structure new leases on those properties. For Warehouse 1 and Cabrillo Way Marina, it's pretty straightforward. We know that's going to be one creative office hotel, one sort of the same type of land use mix that we have at San Pedro Public Market. The cruise terminal is a little bit more wide open, and since we're not going to be redeveloping it initially, we're really looking at how to maximize the cruise terminal operations out of that location right now and to bring in a different type of lease structure to allow that to happen. Right now, we're in an operator's agreement, which means that we, as the Port of LA, basically operate the facility. We want to look at the feasibility of moving into a lease arrangement, so a longer-term lease with the cruise terminal operator that will have tighter connections with liner companies, worldwide, and that will be able to leverage that opportunity to actually invest in the terminal themselves. And in that process, look at the flexibility we need to make sure that we have the ability to do future commercial development on that site when the time is right. It's a critical site. It's right when you get off the freeway. It's right next to a multi-million-dollar fountain that we built, and it's right next to where the promenade really begins. So a really critical site, but not yet ready for development. I think we have to put a better leasing structure there first to get the cruise terminal up and running to its maximum capacity and to bring that cruise terminal traffic back, but continue to look at the long term and make sure we have flexibility to.
I want to hone in on what you said earlier about Warehouse One and Outer Harbor. You have someone, again, in place that's looking at the best and highest use of both those two properties?
Both of those facilities. One company that we'll be using to.
How soon can we get something back on a report back on that?
We're in contract negotiations right now. We're hoping that can wrap up in the next month, and we're hoping to have a finalized report done by July.
Okay. And Mr. Hughes, on the city parking lots, I know we put out an RFP on the 9th Street lot. We got some response back to put mixed use there with workforce housing. Something that Andrew mentioned about the required one-for-one parking replacement. How can we overcome that?
Quite frankly, I don't know how we can overcome the requirements, essentially, that Department of Transportation has, DOT, particularly as it relates to the parking issue. And as it relates to 9th Street specifically, I think there is definitely the one-for-one and existing. I believe there's 54 spaces that need to be replaced. And as you mentioned earlier, we received a proposal, and within that proposal to develop at the site, a mixed-use development, I think they've indicated that they can meet that obligation that the city is putting on them to address.
Still pencils out for them from what they said.
Still pencils out for them, certainly all of which is subject to them getting all the other financing that they need. But if they can get that, it will pencil out, and they're bullish on the area, specifically that site, and they're eager to try to move forward.
So would you encourage then looking at creating in downtown San Pedro like a central parking garage that would make up for those lost spaces if indeed someone was to come in and create more housing in those other parking lots to make up for the one-for-one parking?
I think a study is definitely necessary. I think that'll go a long way towards evaluating and specifically sort of diagnosing the problem, if you will, figure out how we can best address the parking needs. And so a full-blown parking study, I think, would go a long way for San Pedro.
We often hear that from the downtown Pedro merchants that we need more parking, but at the same time, if we can create more housing, bring some more disposable income, and if that's going to be a hindrance on the one-for-one parking, perhaps that we can look to accomplishing. So thank you so much, Sam, for your efforts. To the port, Mike, the Port of LA is moving record amounts of cargo just last year, 8.8 million TEUs. It seems very like every other month, the past 6 months establishes a new record. This report indicates that many of the opportunity sites will require public subsidies and or public infrastructure investment to support new development. Will the success of the industrial side of the port translate to more dollars for the port's $200 million 10-year capital improvement program? As I indicated, as Mr. Soroka said, when the port succeeds, the communities will thrive.
Yes, it will directly. Through the Public Access Investment Plan, which we put together in 2015 under Gene's administration, we have created a scenario where 10% of our operating income goes towards public projects. So as we do better on our bottom line, the public gets more money in capital improvements. So we take 10%, which initially was estimated at about $20 million. It's grown to $21 to $22 million a year that goes directly into public access infrastructure that would tie back into these core projects that we're working on right now and the projects that we're looking at towards the future. So yes, as we continue to grow and gain success, we'll continue to put that money in. We're going to be reporting out on that March 16th in Wilmington at a nighttime meeting at 6 o'clock to discuss where we've gone from in the last 2 years since implementing it, what our results have been financially, therefore what has gone into the kitty for public access investment funds, what we've spent, what's left over, and what projects are coming down the pipeline. So there'll be a comprehensive report on March 16th.
Thank you. And speaking of Wilmington, I know we're looking at partnering with ULI and conducting a technical advisory panel for Wilmington. Any additional information or details we should know about that, Mike?
We'll be talking about that also on March 16th, but we're looking at having that panel convene late April. We're
Okay.
playing with the date right now to make sure that we can get all the community organizations that are necessary to provide input to be there, but we're looking at late April to get that panel together.
So colleagues, thank you so much. The support of this committee and the full council and the mayor has been instrumental in moving forward on key projects. This last year, we signed the lease agreement with the Rakovich Group. We broke ground on the Sampson Way. It's because of the decisions and the support here in this committee. Thanks to your leadership, Mr. Blumenfield, and colleagues here. Really appreciate the support. You know, I've been beating this like a dead horse here, trying to get this thing done.
We
So
want to see it happen. We want
I
to.
appreciate that. One thing I'd ask, Mr. Chair, if we can include this report as part of the CLA's attachment, or the CLA attached this report to this council file. Thank you.
Happy to do that. Colleagues, any additional questions? Mr. Krikorian.
Yeah, first, I want to take every opportunity to congratulate Mr. Buscaino. As he's heard me say a number of times, I used to go to San Pedro as a kid. It was a special treat to go to Port Sacal. The development that you're spearheading, Joe, is going to make sure that my kids and their kids are going to be able to have a special place to go there too. And this is really going to be transformative, I'm sure, for the region because of your leadership. So congratulations, and we're proud to support you in that. It was kind of a glancing fact there that I had not focused on before, but why is it that our cruise traffic has cratered so much over the last 10 years? A 50+% decline, that just jumped out at me, and I don't think I had realized that before. Has Long Beach suffered a comparable decline, or are we losing it to Long Beach, or what's that about?
On the Long Beach piece, dating back to 15 years ago, we did lose a significant piece of cruise traffic to them. So this was a 2-time weekly service, a Carnival service that goes to Ensenada, basically, was lost to Long Beach. That was about 15 years ago. Since then, though, and we peaked out after that, actually, at 1.2 million, I think, in 2006. We've lost it because of general economic conditions, so the economic collapse that occurred in 2008. But prior to that, we started to lose market share generally because of the situation on the west coast of Mexico, first revolving around safety issues, secondarily revolving around there was swine flu issues, and then lastly, the cruise business generally is fickle and needs to be revived pretty constantly. And so because of those other issues, the economics didn't make sense, and there hasn't been a significant amount of competition on the west coast of Mexico, like there is in the Caribbean, where you have multitude of port of calls that are constantly competing against each other, so they're constantly refreshing what is offered to the passengers and what the passengers can go see. On the west coast of Mexico, we have the same Mazatlan, Ensenada, Cabo run that goes on, and there's not a lot of variation from there, and so there's not this inherent competition, and that has driven down the per passenger yield for the cruise lines, and therefore they've decided to move their ships in different locations. There's also environmental requirements in California that may have played a factor in that. I don't think it's a primary factor. I think the market itself is the primary factor. We have an interesting situation where the highest yield in the United States is Alaska. So that's the strongest market in the United States. And that's the reason most of our traffic comes in the wintertime. After Alaska, all the ships come south and they visit Mexico for the winter. Historically, all those ships stayed. But after 2008, a variety of them decided to go to different locations to get a better passenger yield. So we are starting to claw some of that back, but it's because of those issues, some economic general, some to do with the market conditions on the west coast of Mexico needing to improve. We have been working with the Mexican government in doing that and in their tourist operations as well to try to revive that cruise market, but it is a slow process.
I see. Great, thank you. So just a couple of points to look forward to as we move forward with the RFP and look at ways to develop these properties. One is here and everywhere else throughout our city when we're looking at use of city property, we have this sort of interface between economic development uses and homelessness uses, which we've prioritized both of those things in all parts of the city. And I know Joe is focused on workforce housing, which is critically important. But how do we, I mean, that's not an economic choice. That's a really policy choice. So when you're analyzing the economic potential, how do we take that into account too, that we also are working really hard to try to find surplus property that can be used for homeless housing, for permanent supportive housing and otherwise?
The port doesn't allow housing on our property, so it's not a question that I can answer.
Right, but the other properties that we were talking about. So, I mean, that's just really our call, I guess. No, well, it wasn't exactly rhetorical, but I suppose it's directed more at us than you. But that is one of the things we're going to have to take into account citywide. And then the other thing is, as we do look at the potential for economic development of these properties and any other properties, if there is going to be any subsidization or, city support for that, then, we're obviously going to be wanting to look at what's the best return on investment among all the parcels, because we've done a terrific job, finally, of inventorying the properties. Because I know every single one of us, the day we walked into office, were astonished to find out that we couldn't get that information about what are the properties in our district, what are the properties elsewhere that are surplus or that are available or that the city even owns. We have that now, thank God. And so we can actually move forward in having a citywide strategic plan for economic development based on best use and best return on investment of each of these properties. So as we move forward with this, I wanted to highlight those two issues because those are both going to be important to me in figuring out what we do with these and all the other properties throughout the city.
Thank you. Mr. Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really just wanted to say a few words of congratulations and praise to Mr. Buscaino and his staff who have been working on this, and to the port as well. I remember when downtown Los Angeles was not a place folks would go, and nobody believed it was a place that anybody would ever go. And people didn't listen to the naysayers, and people did the long, slow, hard work of investing in downtown. And now if you just came to Los Angeles, you moved here a year or two ago, you never would have known that Los Angeles' downtown was not someplace you would have gone. And that moment is coming for San Pedro. I've seen you articulate this vision, and I've seen you slowly, methodically go through all the different hurdles and over all the humps to move this forward. And it's visible now. I mean, the beginnings of it with Crafted and with everything, San Pedro, as a guy who goes there a lot because of family, is very different than it was before you took office. And that transformation is happening. And it's going to be amazing when it's done. But it's already a very cool place. My 3-year-old every single day takes an imaginary train ride to San Pedro because he likes it so much. So he's going to like it even more when he has a driver's license.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. This is a note and file item, and with attaching the CAO report as Mr. Buscaino asked for. With that,
Right, attach this report,
attach this report.
EPS report, to the council file. Thank you.
Absolutely, without objection. So that'll be the order. Thank you very much for the good report. Very informative. Next, before we go to the next item, I wanted to take up general public comment. We have a few comment cards. Mr. Herman is not here. Pepita Pig, not here. Antonio Ramirez. Public comment is closed. So now we can move to item 6. That's general public comment is closed. Go ahead for item 6, Mr. Tristan.
Item number 6, a report from the Los Angeles World Airports relative to the city's non-discrimination policy for taxi companies at Los Angeles International Airport.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Mark Adams, Los Angeles World Airports. I'm here with my colleagues who will introduce themselves at time. We adopted, as the committee is well aware, we had an incident in September 2015 where a person suffered from a pretty obvious discrimination incident when they arrived at LAX. That became was subject of council hearings last year. Since that time, I think we submitted a report to the file last week that describes the actions we've taken to try to shore up our discrimination process and try to prevent this from ever happening again. We adopted a series of actions. We amended our management contract with ATS, the taxi cab operating supervising company. We have amended our rules and regulations. We have shored up our complaint review procedures. We instituted through ATS, we instituted a training program where over 3,000 drivers were trained in the proper procedures so that this wouldn't happen again. And I think, in the past year, in the year 2016, we noted that there were only 6 complaints of discrimination. 3 were racially based, 3 were ADA based, and 1 of the ADA complaints and 3 of the discrimination complaints all led to driver suspensions. So I think we're adopting the zero tolerance policy that the committee asked for. And we're also doing secret shopper exercises out there. We've done several of those over the past year, and I think those have been also successful at reducing the likelihood that we'll have another incident like we did in 2015.
Additional opening comments, or?
Charlene Sue, Landside Management, Airport Permits. And, as the report stated and Mark mentioned, we have instituted some additional measures to ensure that ATS, as well as our other modes, have non-discrimination clauses within their agreement. We've also revised and updated our ground transportation rules and regs that include law's ability to remove any of the operators or vehicles should there be any discrimination in services found.
Good afternoon. Anthony Boisel, Los Angeles Airport Police, the officer in charge of traffic and motors. We were the unit that was in charge of doing the undercover sting operations on the taxi drivers once we received information on the discrimination complaint. Through our details, we've had four details spanning over 5 days. Our total numbers is we tested 104 taxi cabs, 9 refusals. 7 of the refusals were due to distance, and 2 of the refusals were due to race issues. All 9 refusals were cited.
Sorry, that was, when was that done? You say?
We had a operation on, we received the information, I received the information in October of 2015. So we had one operation spanning over 2 days. It was November 17th and 18th of 2015. We did it again in April of 2016, another one in August of 2016, and one is, our last one was in January of 2017, and our next one will be in March.
Right.
When we received this information, we took a 2-prong approach. The first one was to do the operation stings. The second one was to utilize our motor officers during their daily contacts with the taxi drivers and educate them on that particular incident and let them know that we will be doing stings and we'll be testing. The overall reception was very good, and our results show with 104 vehicles tested, two refusals based on race.
No, I have in my notes, maybe something wrong. The latest one, it was 2 out of the 17 refusals. So that would make it 11%. And then, so it's something is off either in my numbers. What I have is April 16th, there was 32 drivers. There was a 3% refusal rate. And then January, there was an 11% refusal rate.
Right. In April, we had 1 refusal based on race, and then in January of 2017, 2 refusals. None of them were based on race. They were based on distance. The issue with the taxi drivers, when our officers contacted the taxi drivers, is basically they wait in a line to get to the front. They have to go to a taxi holding lot area, then they wait, and a lot of the people that they get want to go to a local hotel. So the taxi drivers say, well, you can use that shuttle bus, you can use this, it's free, or you can use this. By the rules, they're not allowed to do it. And when they refuse them, that's where we cite them. But so out of all the refusals that we had, which were 9 refusals, 7 or more based on distance and distance proximity. One of our cases, 2 of them, we actually had our undercover officer, want to go to In-N-Out, which was up the street on 92nd and Sepulveda, and we got the refusal. And then 2 of them were based on race. We used a distance, a longer distance, somewhere down in Los Angeles, somewhere far away, and they refused.
And so how do you know, in terms of the short trips, how do you know it was the short trip versus the race of the passenger?
Based on the testimony of the officer, the interaction between the officer and the taxi driver, where do you want to go? I want to go to, the Century Hotel. Oh, just take that free bus. That's a refusal. Where do you want to go? I want to go to In-N-Out. Well, you could just walk. And when we talk to the drivers, they're saying, well, that's a couple dollars. I've waited in line for 2 hours, and I don't want to, I'm gonna have to pay $4 already just to get in line, and it's only costing me this much. So that's where the differences are. The ones that were based on race were very obvious.
Okay. So this will continue then, the secret chopper sting operations will continue, into the next year or 2 years?
Yeah, ever since we've got information, we do them quarterly.
Right. Just want to make sure that's going to continue, and we'll probably, at the end of this, ask to hear back about how that went the next time around.
Absolutely.
And were there driver suspensions?
Through Charlene's reports, there are, with regards to the 2 that were issued with race, they went to the Department of Transportation, and I don't know the outcome. I assume that they were, but I can find out and get back to you.
Yeah, there were suspensions imposed following the hearing with the Taxi Commission.
Okay. And then some of the refusals are based on ADA issues, right? Or disability?
With regards to our sting, the answer is no.
In terms of the complaints we had received, what my records indicated were that the one ADA complaint that resulted in a suspension was due to a service animal refusal. The other complaints were based on that there weren't ADA taxis readily available. And for that complaint, it's not really on a particular driver, but we have to work with ATS to make sure that there's more ADA taxis available. So those did not, the no taxi available ones did not result in suspensions.
And then we were also doing this on checking the Uber and Lyft data being checked in a similar manner, correct?
Correct. Both Uber and Lyft, part of the TNC operations at LAX, they're required to file monthly reports, a separate one including the ADA discrimination or complaints, as well as any discrimination complaints that they have received directly to their company is reported to LAWA. We also have within LAX our own complaint response, or in emails and phones and info lines that any of the customers can report directly to LAX on any complaints that they have, discrimination or otherwise. LAX has not received any discrimination complaints directly. We have received the reports from Lyft and Uber throughout the entire period that we've had the operation. Lyft has not reported that they've received any discrimination complaints. We've had some reports from Razier, who's more commonly known as Uber, of having received some discrimination complaints with ADA and race-related. In the report, we kind of detailed what that amount is that we've received since they began reporting that to us.
Yeah, so it was 49 for Uber and 0 for Lyft.
Correct.
But I didn't know how to contextualize that in terms of 49 versus how many overall trips, and how do you compare that to the 269 cabs versus how many trips?
Well, overall, in terms of, for Uber, in terms of their volume, for the calendar year 2016, the reporting for Uber and Lyft is both to LAX and from LAX versus the taxis. They're typically on pickups. So for combined totals, for the whole year for the TNCs in total, we had about 5.7 million trips, both pickups and drop-offs, about 3.4 drop-offs and 2.2 in terms of pickups. So relative to that, we've had reported from Uber 49 discrimination complaints filed directly with them.
And the cab ratio was 269, but there's probably, the numbers are probably much higher.
Well, in terms,
Denominator.
Well, 269 was all the complaints. The racial and ADA complaints were only 6 of the 269.
so that would be 6 out of a total of pickups for 2016 out of 1.9 million pickup trips. 6 were categorized as discrimination complaints out of that amount.
That's interesting. So cabs are actually less trips now than Uber and Lyft?
That's correct.
I wouldn't have guessed that, but okay. And has there been any action, because part of what we had last time was if there were these incidents that there would be graduated penalties for not just the driver, but for the cab company themselves. Has there been any of that action?
Well, we've been following, again, as part of the First Amendment, they're required to report to us anytime there is a complaint or incident, and staff follows up, making sure that it's adjudicated correctly according to the procedures. So in following the 6 discrimination complaints, we're satisfied that there was due process, and we received the reports in the manner prescribed for their agreement.
Colleagues, additional questions on this? Mr. Krikorian?
I first want to thank the airport for the seriousness with which you've taken this issue. I know Chairman Blumenfield and the rest of us were pretty outraged when we first heard about these reports, and it's clear that the airport has taken these reports very seriously and has acted, and this is very helpful to have this report. One of the things that I noted is that the cab driver responsible for the first complaint was suspended for 1 year, and I understand that there were, from what you've said, that there have been other suspensions since then. All of the cab drivers have been required to take a 3.5-hour class on discrimination and so on, right? So there have been real steps taken that have shown real consequences and real results. And I guess I want to just take a moment to compare and contrast, because it seems from the numbers that you're giving that TNCs are becoming the more dominant form of ground transportation than taxis are. I guess that's the nature of disruptive technology. But another part of disruptive technology is, changing the regulatory environment. So how many of the Lyft drivers have or Uber drivers have similarly taken 3.5 hours of discrimination training?
Actually, in terms of for law, the license agreement requires them to have provisions within their training and within their license agreement. Our license agreement directly with the company and not with the drivers includes the non-discrimination terms and conditions, as well as abiding with our LAX ground transportation rules and regulations, which were updated recently, that any incident of non-discrimination of discrimination could result in immediate removal of the operator and the vehicles associated with that act.
Right.
In terms of the training that goes on directly with the drivers, I would actually defer to, we have representatives here representing Uber and Lyft in terms of the stringency that they do, the training for their driver partners.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear.
Welcome.
I break the microphone. Hi, I'm Sarah Ashton. I'm the public affairs representative for Uber. So a couple of things I think I can speak to. Some of our onboarding process specifically has a discrimination training component of it that happens across all of our drivers. We also, though, taking a step back to the big picture, we have our community guidelines, what all riders and drivers on our platform are asked to adhere to. So we have a very kind of strict code of conduct. The other thing I would note that's maybe different about our platform is we seek over reporting. So when we have incidents like this, we're both looking at people who have actively reported an incident and a claim, and we're also reading through their comments to see if there's anything that could potentially denote that there was an incident, and so we're even exploring those. And so we kind of, as an organization, value this type of over-reporting because we think it actually leads to a better understanding of our customer experience and actually being able to be much more responsive. As far as I can go into, if you want to walk through our specific steps that we take when incidents do happen.
No, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
But I just, the question was in terms of sitting down for discrimination-related training.
Yeah.
It's on the platform, I gather, that, you know, that
Yeah,
that
it's a
happens.
component of our onboarding
Okay.
process.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, so, and I appreciate your comments about over-reporting, that's important, and I note the contrast between Uber and Lyft here. I'm confused by that because it's hard for me to imagine that there could be zero complaints over any period of time. So is that just a luck of the draw, that, or is it a reporting difference between Uber and Lyft?
We have, my name is Diana Delamere. I'm a public policy manager at Lyft. We do get reports on every single trip, so customers give feedback for every trip. So this would be an accurate indicator of there just have not been reports on our platform.
Okay,
They can't be missed in the way that we do the reporting.
okay. All right, so then in terms of consequences, just by way of comparison again, in 12 months, cabs had 3 race-related complaints and 3 ADA complaints. In 12 months, Uber had 20 ADA complaints. And in 4 months, not 12, 4 months, Uber had 23 race-related complaints. So it seems that, you know, maybe some more of the training like the cab industry has might be helpful in bringing those numbers down. I also note that while cab drivers are suspended when there's similar complaints, the Uber response is to contact the driver to further understand the situation and inform the driver of ADA and or anti-discrimination policies.
So
Not exactly a tangible consequence.
So during any of the investigation, the driver is immediately suspended from the platform during the investigation process. So we make sure that we are, you know, immediately hitting pause to evaluate both from the rider and driver perspective. Again, in a number of those incidents, what we found is that we've kind of due to our over-reporting, there was in fact, we'll follow up with a rider and they won't respond to us, right? So maybe they were just writing something in their comments, but it wasn't formalized as far as a complaint. So I think then we also have incidents where, you know, depending on the level of offense, there are certain instances where we might consider doing a warning. And then there are other incidents where driver partners would be removed from the platform. I don't have those numbers specifically in front of me, but I think we definitely, similar to taxi, have a spectrum of responses.
In addition, as part of the TNC license agreement, they are required to have annual training for their drivers and retraining. So as we have come up on the 1 year of operations, we are working with both Uber and Lyft in terms of revisiting and improving their training or emphasizing areas that need retraining for their drivers going forward as the 1 year anniversary of their operations.
Okay. And I guess in terms of short-term refusal, there's nothing comparable between cabs and TNCs on that because a TNC driver can pick and choose which trips they want to accept, I gather, right?
The TNC driver doesn't know where they're going until they actually start the trip, and it's a mechanism to help prevent against that. I mean, I think as the airport knows, there's constant attempts to game that system, and it's something we are, as a company, always looking to prevent, but it's one of the mechanisms we put in place that was specifically to address that refusal based on distance challenge that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, we've received some notices of that, and we've followed up with Uber and, you know, have safeguards on that in terms of the same discipline process for their drivers.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Does LAWA have access to, I mean, you mentioned that you forward the complaints to LAWA, but in terms of the general comments that happen after each ride. Is that something that's available for LAWA to look at?
We haven't, at
You
this
haven't
point,
asked for it.
asked for it.
I'm guessing there might be confidentiality concerns there. That would be my guess, but it's not something that's part of our current reporting process.
Yeah, I mean, maybe something to consider. The confidentiality issues, I think, could be worked out fairly easily because it's not making it public, but it would be, part of the MOU with the airport.
I think
that
that's
they have.
something we can look further into in terms of what kind of additional detail we can receive without exposing, any confidential information of the driver or patron.
I mean, in terms of that, would get at, Mr. Porian's question about, knowing that the zero number from Lyft was indeed a zero number, and not sort of a gloss over from. So there may be something that can be worked out fairly easily with LAWA that would maintain confidentiality and all the rest. I don't know if that's been explored or not, but
We'll work with the TNCs, look at the information, and confer with the city attorney.
colleagues, any additional questions? Great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. On this was also a note and file, although I do want us to get an update in maybe 90 days or something, and that after your next secret shopper, maybe a quick update on how that process is going. But we can move on to and so without objection, that'll be the order. And our next item, and for the record, there were no additional public comment cards on this item except the three that I mentioned who are not here. Item number 9, correct?
Item number 9 is report from the City Administrative Officer relative to the Innovation and Performance Commission's Innovation Fund funding for the Los Angeles Fire Department nurse practitioner at Dispatch Pilot.
And good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I'm Bianca, project coordinator for the Innovation and Performance Commission. Bianca Swan, to state full name. Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of the Innovation Performance Commission, who recommends $234,000 to fund the nurse practitioners at Dispatch Pilot, a 12-month pilot program that will staff 2 nurse practitioners at the Metropolitan Fire Communications 911 Dispatch Center. The purpose of this pilot is to allow low-acuity 911 calls to be more thoroughly screened in order to reduce the call load and the unnecessary dispatch of scarce emergency resources in ambulance transport of low-acuity patients. I have Dr. Eckstein here, along with members of Fire Department, to be able to provide more insight into this pilot and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, honorable council members. I have with me Chief Calvillo, who's the commander of Metropolitan Fire Communications Dispatch System, and Captain Werfel, dispatch manager. As you know, the fire department's been challenged to keep up with the increasing numbers of EMS calls, and also compounded with wall time. And the bulk of our increase in calls are actually lower acuity calls that where an ambulance is probably not necessary. So in our multi-pronged approach to come up with a better solution, rather than sending fire engines and paramedic ambulances to these calls, as you know, we've successfully implemented a nurse practitioner response unit to treat and release these individuals, transport to alternative destinations such as sobering centers and mental health facilities. And now we're looking to take that one step further and place these advanced providers at our dispatch system, dispatch center. And what we're going to do is, with our multiple stakeholders, our work group, basically identify those types of calls that our dispatchers currently process and are dispatched on a low acuity basis, sending an EMT ambulance, non-emergency, for example. We would, instead of dispatching the call, transfer the call to a nurse practitioner or PA at dispatch, and then that EMS advanced provider will be able to do a more thorough interrogation of the caller, and then ideally get to basically a nurse referral line, nurse advice line, so there'll be a no send. It will result in no dispatching of our scarce emergency fire department resources, or we could dispatch a taxi cab if just transport's required but no medical intervention is required. or they could request the dispatch of an EMT ambulance non-emergency. So this is just another effort of ours to be innovative, to change our approach due to the increasing and changing nature of the EMS call load on our department.
Was one of the things that pops out that could be of concern is the liability issue. You know, if you get a 911 call and they ask for an ambulance and you don't send one and you send it to a nurse practitioner, and then God forbid something happens, do we not assume some dangerous liability?
Yeah, certainly there's certainly some liability built in. The ways we're looking to mitigate that is multifold. First of all, these are some EMS systems, some 911 centers around the country have successfully implemented similar programs just with nurses fulfilling this role. We're looking to take this several steps further. So by placing advanced providers such as a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant who have many more hours of training, they're much more able to safely identify those patients who don't need a 911 response. There's also, we know, a number of callers who just want some advice, who don't necessarily need an ambulance or even request an ambulance. And we're going to do this, obviously. Patient safety and liability, obviously, is paramount, so we're going to do this in a very measured approach. I would also argue that when we do send our scarce resources, whether it's a fire company or an ambulance, to these very low-level calls, I would argue that we are already incurring some risk because the next call in that district where now there's no resource available potentially compromises the patient who really does have a time-critical emergency in terms of medical risk and liability. So we are definitely looking to do this as carefully as possible, but with selecting only the lowest acuity calls, most of which we're sending now non-emergency. And again, if there's any doubt, we would dispatch. But again, this type of pilot has been successfully implemented in other centers, usually with nurses, but again, this is a much higher level of training and a much higher level of safety.
And is there a correlation with when you have a nurse practitioner dispatcher and having a nurse practitioner in the field, or do they run independently?
So that we run independently. So the call would be that our current dispatchers would still process the calls as they normally do to ascertain the address, confirm the address, and ascertain the nature of the emergency. Only those calls that would be designated as a very low acuity call now, when is an NP on duty at dispatch if this program is approved, they would then do that more structured, thorough interrogation to determine if they can safely refer the patient without dispatching any of our resources.
So as opposed to if you sent a nurse practitioner out with a crew and then they were able to stand there, I guess it's a different function. I was thinking that they were more linked, but they're independent.
Yeah, there could be some overlap. So one of the options would be they may request an NPRU to be dispatched non-emergency. Obviously, right now we have one unit. We're looking to add several more in the next few months. But this is taking a step further. And again, this is something that has been successfully done in other jurisdictions. Again, we're mindful. Patient safety obviously is paramount, and we're certainly mindful of potential liability.
And then I guess related to the two of them, again, this is not the budget committee, but is money better spent on expanding the nurse practitioner units that are in the field that are so limited but have been, as I understand it, greatly successful, versus starting a new nurse practitioner dispatch? I mean, if you had the dollars, which would you spend it on? Would you expand the current nurse practitioner's unit, or would you add it to this dispatch? And it may not be a fair question because this is something new that you're putting out there, and I respect that, but trying to understand the relative importance.
No, thank you for your question. It's an excellent question. We're certainly mindful that we all want to be good stewards of limited dollars, and we're certainly appreciative of the opportunity through the Innovation Fund. I think you're correct. The NPRU pilot has been extremely successful. We're very excited about expanding that through public-private partnerships, as you're aware. Other agencies are following our lead. I think in the true spirit of the Innovation Fund, this is an opportunity to pilot a program. So we'll know after the end of the 12-month pilot if this is successful and worth spending limited dollars to expand both from the dispatch side as well as the field side, or we may determine it's more effective to put more in the field. We're also considering adding a telemedicine component. So this is an opportunity to trial or pilot a program to see where to best spend limited dollars. And we don't know at this point, but I think it'd be a little bit short-sighted to say, let's just expand the field program. And I think talking to our dispatchers and commanders from Dispatch Center and listening to a lot of calls, there are certainly a number of calls where they know this probably doesn't warrant the response of any fire department resource. So I think there's clearly a number of calls. Even if we could eliminate 5% of those calls, that would have a significant impact in the field where we have very limited resources available, and then they're traveling, and then, of course, the transport results in extended turnaround time and wall time.
Colleagues? Additional questions? Mr. Kokori?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know one of the things that the sworn dispatchers have expressed frustration about is having to go through the protocol of questions when their professional judgment tells them they know exactly what's needed, as soon as they pick up the phone, but they have to go through this protocol of questions. Will this have the potential to reduce the need to do all of that, or will this be sort of at the tail end of the protocol?
So to be clear, the call will initially be processed the same way it is now. Basically confirm the address, ascertain the nature of the emergency. If it's an emergency call, it'll be dispatched as it usually is. But one thing that's changed since we put our own dispatch system in a little over 2 years ago now, I would argue, and I'll defer to our dispatch manager, Captain Werfel, the dispatchers are been unanimously supportive of the new system. The questions are very much to the point. Our call processing times are down 25% on our time-critical calls. We eliminated superfluous questions.
Great.
The dispatchers often say they don't spend their days arguing with the callers, which is a great change. This, to be clear, is not to replace dispatchers, but this is basically an opportunity to take that subset of calls that probably don't need emergency response and see if we could safely determine that subset. Captain Werfel, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. Tim Werfel, Dispatch Manager. So to your question, Council Member, in regard to being able to send early on, we launched the tiered dispatch system in 2014, and one of the things that we changed, since how we built it ourselves, is we allowed the dispatchers, when they identified a critical patient early on, to dispatch what we call an immediate dispatch. And we also simulcast that on the radio, which allows other resources that may be on the radio closer to attach themselves to the incident. So that's one of the improvements from the system that we were using previously. And also, just to be clear, we sort of referred to the nurse practitioner dispatcher, but really what we're doing is we're processing the call just as we would. We have a sworn dispatcher that's going to do the address validation and ascertain the callback number, verify the location on the cell site map, and process the call all the way down to a point where they would pick a pre-identified code that would qualify to be transferred to the advanced provider or the nurse practitioner. So they would have minimal training on actual address validation or, the tiered dispatch system. We would be handing them a call that was already packaged, it was already created in CAD, and to reduce our liability and not have to have so much training for them. So,
great, thank you.
Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you for your efforts. I believe, the Performance, Innovation Performance Commission is one of my favorite commissions around. I really appreciate the out-of-box thinking. I do have a technical question on the dispatch of the NP. Where is he or she housed?
That's a great question. Our current we have one current nurse practitioner response unit. They're currently housed at Fire Station 15 by USC Main Campus. And then as we're adding additional more, we have funding from Cedar Sinai and Kaiser Permanente so far for the public-private partnership. We're going to be putting those out regionally around those hospitals. So there'll be at least one in the San Fernando Valley, one in South LA, and another one or two on the west side. So we're trying to maximize coverage with the ensuing nurse practitioner response units.
And you anticipate success here, right? I know we're just going through the motions as we prepare for the next budget cycle. What is your goal? What do you need from us to move forward? I believe it's still a pilot, but let's be honest with ourselves. This thing is going to take off. It's going to be helpful with our overall response times.
Well, certainly, I certainly appreciate your vote of confidence. And to be clear, I think everyone's questions, I they're spot on. They're great questions. I can tell you as a physician, patient safety is paramount. Is there some liability? Well, I would argue, and we talk about this all the time, we can never eliminate risk from our business or dispatch. But again, I think we have to be clear, when we send an ambulance to somebody who doesn't need one, I would argue that next patient who does need one, who now has to wait for an ambulance to the next community, we're jeopardizing their lives.
Understand.
So I respectfully ask this honorable committee to approve funding for the pilot for 1 year. We're going to come back with a number of metrics, and we're going to build this very carefully with many, many stakeholders, and I'm very confident this will be successful and be able to improve response times for critical patients and minimize the impact of the growing call load for low acuity patients that really do not warrant responsive 911 resources.
Got it. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, no additional questions? Well, seems like a great program, and Dr. Eckstein, you've done it again, coming forward with something, and Swan, the fire department is leading the way in terms of how to use this innovation fund to push the envelope. And so we urge the rest of the city to look at that, the examples that you guys are setting each time around with something innovative that could have cost savings, which is the kind of thing we look at. It's a big chunk of the innovation fund. We realize that. That being said, it's tremendous possibilities of savings. So I'm going to recommend that we move forward with the recommendations, and appreciate the great work that you guys are doing on the
Thank you.
innovation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So without objection, that'll be the order. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your support.
Great, thank you. And just for the record, we only had 3 public comment cards. I called the names on those. It's the same 3 names. They are not here. And we're going to move to item number 10.
Item number 10 is a verbal report from the Information Technology Agency relative to the department's top priorities.
And Mr. Ross, we wanted to, again, thank you. You were bumped last week at the end of the hearing after a very long hearing. This has been not as lengthy, but it has been long. We appreciate that you're here. Next time we'll have to put Mr. Ross on the front of the agenda. This is cruel and unusual to do to him.
Sorry, Mr. Busca, and I'll need to leave right now.
You had the appetizer, you had the meal, but here is the dessert.
So please take it away.
Excellent. Ted Ross, General Manager with the Information Technology Agency. There's always a lot of very exciting things going on in IT and going on in city IT. But when requested to try to shorten it up to 10 of them, I went ahead and went through these. So first and foremost is the new financial management system, procurement system, testing and training. So we're at the point now where we're finishing up testing of this system. It's been a while coming, and we're now running through all the training for city staff. So this is the replacement of the city's existing supply management system, the SMS system, which processes around 87,000 purchase orders a year. It's around $450 million of all the supplies and commodities. That system is now being incorporated into our financial system, which will give us real-time budget checks, great inventory capabilities, great vendor self-service capabilities for our vendors to have online portals to submit for electronic payment and a variety of other things. It eliminates 13,300 of staff hours every year from the controller's office and general services. There's a lot of really great things. That goes live in July. We are in the point right now of training 3,000 users, which will be an estimated 8,500 seats, so that they are fully capable to be up and running and roll this system out and use it and be very effective at it. Second item has to do with
Just as you go through each one, if colleagues, if there's any questions on we might as
Feel
well
free to jump in.
do it as we jump in. But, on this one, how much money do you think this will save?
So the way we had the estimates before, that reconciliation process alone that the previous system required is around $800,000 a year. In addition, there's around $450,000 around support associated with it. So those are 2 of the very discrete costs we could point at. There's certainly costs with the additional system that offset that, but those were 2 kind of high dollar value items that we were able to immediately identify.
I just wanted to point that out. I mean, this is a great example of sort of Moore's law, doing more for less, and
That's right.
technology. When we actually spend the money to update something, we actually see real savings.
That's right.
From it in the long run. So this is a great example of that.
There's quite a few projects we have which are kind of the silent heroes, in which you'll have literally thousands of people involved that touches hundreds of thousands of processes. But these are the items that we want to be very effective at. In some ways, no news is good news when it's coming out of the IT agency. LA City View Channel 35 moved, so we've had to make a move of the TV station. Unfortunately, we had a lease termination in Little Tokyo, so we had to move them into City Hall. As a part of it, we didn't just make the move to be able to get out of the bad lease situation, but we also used it as an opportunity to improve council chambers displays, as the council members probably noticed in the last month or so. We leveraged the move to also convert to HD recording as well as modernized our opening credits. And so we tried to use this as an opportunity to make a refresh around everything.
Where are you relocating to?
So we've got staff that are up here on the 10th floor. They're coming into these offices, as well as we've got operations 1 floor almost directly beneath chambers.
Where's the studio going to be?
So studio is actually a lease that we still currently have. Yeah, it was the operations that had to move. IT emergency procedures. We're very aware of the fact that at no time do people rely on us more than during a disaster. And so we've done a complete rewrite of IT as emergency procedures. This covers all the simple things of building evacuations and how to run a 311 center when we don't have access to a building, to much more complex things like sizable earthquakes. So we're doing we already have completed it, and we're going through testing and exercises. So we're training all the staff on all of our procedures so that we can try to restore and run operations both in our local data center as well as in our local facilities, as well as getting our operations up and running with things like remote data centers.
On the emergency side of things, with this rainstorm, dealing with a lot of constituents and down trees, down this, down that, and I was telling them about the 311 app. But the 311 app didn't look any different during the weekend of the storms.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's thoughts about doing something in real time on that, when we have a big storm or an earthquake, so that when folks pick it up, and maybe that's too hard to predict, but that it's more directly centered. Report down trees that happened because of this storm, or et cetera, et cetera.
That's a great suggestion. We have the capabilities that we built into the platforms to be able to push notifications out, but we haven't necessarily identified how we want to use it and when we want to use it. But I think that's a very good suggestion. It's just building into the basic persona. If someone's going to the app and it's during a major rainstorm, then it's good to be able to give them some breadcrumbs as to where they may want to go to make a submission, because most likely that may be what they're looking
or
at.
even the information that normally it takes 2 days to fill a pothole, but during this rainstorm it's going to take 4 or 5, which something I told a lot of constituents during the process, but somehow that could be built right in.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so we'll identify kind of the top submitted requests based on types of events. So for a rainstorm, we'll have X events. During a heat wave, we'll have Y events. And we'll start to identify how we can start to push that out so it feels a lot more personalized. The next item has to do with the new street sweeper notification system. So we were brought in to work with Bureau of Street Services as well as Department of Transportation. And this is to put together capabilities to be able to notify somebody that a street sweeper's passed and they're allowed to park on that street. It's a multi-legged project. It's got the notification to DOT to ensure they don't give the ticket, as well as it's got the tracking of the street sweepers, in which they've already been doing some work through ORPAC. And then we'd be working to be able to push the notifications out. We'll have both a website as well as anybody with the MyLA app can go ahead and subscribe and receive that information. So we're trying to identify multiple digital ways so that you can sign up for, let's say, an address, and as soon as the street sweeper goes past, it'll let you know that you're allowed to park there. I think the great benefit of that is that you've got a 2-hour window, right, in which the street sweeper could have hypothetically gone past in the first 5 minutes. And you still have an hour and 55 minutes in which you don't feel like you could park there and could still get a ticket. And so it's...
Or when something hasn't been swept, we'll now know as well. And we have an update on this in T Committee, I think, next month.
That's right.
How far along are we in this?
We're far along enough to have a good understanding of the architecture and the platform. We know what vendors we need to work with. what the different systems are involved, because you've got street sweeper information that APIs over to DOT and Xerox, as well as what we need to be able to provide. The difficulty we're running into is simply getting all the vendors on board, getting the work done, testing, and then rolling it out. So that's the issue that we have. But we've got a very good project manager on this project to ensure that we can get this done as fast as possible.
Thanks for your help on that.
Absolutely.
So there's beta testing on that happening, or?
Not yet.
Not yet. That's-
Not yet. We've got good logic coming out of the street sweepers in regards to their GPS and their location. Now we need to get that logic out and be able to have something for people to subscribe to.
Right. And hopefully it'll be more than the subscription. You want to be able to tell people, you see a street sign, you click on you punch it in the address, you can know exactly.
I'm right there with you.
Yep.
Completely agree.
Great.
The next item has to do with Amazon Alexa. So we're always really big on trying to get people to be able to engage with government in new and clever ways. And so with Amazon Echoes and Echo Dots, of which there are already something like 3 million in sales of those devices, and this is before this last holiday season. So no doubt there's a lot more because they've been on sale. $40, kids, over the sale for Echo Dots. But all I'm saying is that here's the ability in your living room to be able to talk and interact. So we created over the holidays an LA City Skill, in which we started to show information regarding local events, like ice skating at Pershing Square and a variety of other types of events, so that you could say, hey, what's going on this weekend? And it can tell you various kinds of city events. So we're in the process of kind of upping this, and we've been getting actually a lot of interest in regards to this and a lot of traffic. So we're starting to push the idea of both library as well as recreation and park information. So we're starting to digest a lot of their databases. We were also given some, we got an email from Amazon, believe it or not, in which they said, this is really cool, you're doing it. Here's another skill that you could add to it that'll allow you to get locations, so that you can much more easier say what community you are. And so they kind of gained observation of it. Ultimately, where we want to go is to be able to leverage virtual assistants like Amazon Alexa to submit 311 requests. So we see this as one of those future types of efforts that we're certainly working towards.
Then you're going to have it listening all the time, so if it mentions a particular council member, it'll immediately put some editorial comments out
That's
there.
right,
Yeah.
of which is provided by the council member. Yeah.
So the 311 piece, that's part of what's going to roll out? When will that be?
That we're working on. To make the full request is a lot more complicated, is what we're seeing. So we're trying to break down different requests, see what works fairly naturally over voice. We didn't want someone to sign up for a 7-minute back and forth just to simply submit something. So we'd absolutely be, we're one of the first cities, certainly to even be doing this. We would definitely be one of the first governments in the world to be able to capture that. Don't have any allocated staff. It's just one of those things that people work on whenever they find the time.
Yeah, that would certainly be. It's a small thing, but it would definitely get us a lot of visibility and good PR among folks.
Well, when we go back in time, it used to be you had to go to a city facility to request something, then you could call a city facility to request something, then you could go online to request something, and you could use the mobile app. We see this as the ability to ask for something in your living room, and we think that's just taking technology to where it needs to be.
Right. And Alexa's going to be more mobile soon anyway.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
New city call center phone systems. This month we're completing our final. We have upgraded the IVR call center software for 27 call centers across the city of Los Angeles over the last year. Everything from the big 311 call center to much smaller ones. This represents a much more reliable call center system, as well it gives a lot more features, including callback features. So when people are on hold, they have the choice of leaving their phone number and just simply receiving a call back. So we went ahead and rolled all of this out across every city call center. The HR system payroll, HR payroll system planning. So we're in the process right now of, we've got really quite an old legacy payroll system. It's custom built, has a lot of risks associated with it. And so in response to the council committee report, we're going to be doing the requirements analysis and providing the reports back. The city is in a dire situation, I think. If we don't take steps now, we'll certainly be exposed to great risk later when it comes to our payroll system and maintaining payroll for city employees. The next item is Anytime, Anywhere Gmail. This month we're doing the final steps in it so that we've already disclosed, but we've got it available that any city employee, of course subject to FLSA requirements, can access their email from anywhere in the world by simply going to mail.lacity.org. This is something that may seem quite simple on the face of it. We had to go through a lot of back office and kind of back channel items to be able to get all that situated and set up, but we think this is just a great way of empowering a mobile and a digital workforce.
And has it been used so far? I mean,
Absolutely, quite a bit. In fact, we even had situations where people had to use a very complex system to be able to simply get to their email, and this eliminates all of those users in a good way.
I really hate to raise this issue,
Sure.
but all of us are 24/7. We're checking our texts and emails, but for our salaried employees, our 40-hour employees,
Yep.
there has been some discussion in other workplace contexts about, late night checking of emails constituting, performing duties on overtime.
Yep.
How are we going to regulate that to make sure that we don't incur potential liabilities for overtime or other kind of wage and hour issues?
It's a fantastic question. What we do is that if you're logging into mail.lacity.org within the city network, you go straight to a great looking screen, you get into your email. If you're logging in from outside of the city network, for example at home, you're given an additional policy that is very clear on the screen, in which we highlight, and we worked with city attorney and others to have all the proper wording, which says very clearly in plain English language, if you are subject to Fair Labor Standards Act, if you're a non-exempt employee, it incurs overtime for you to be working after your normal shift. And so it describes it very eloquently where I am not. And so that you're basically very clearly seeing the notification so that you are not committing yourself to it. And it suggests that you talk to your supervisor before you do so. So it both gives them their rights and very clearly states it, and it states that it is certainly subject to overtime so that we have everything above boards.
Great.
Mr. Jones, do you want to add something?
Well, I'm just going to add that the warning recommends or requires that you to get supervisor approval before utilizing it. I mean, it's up to the employee to follow the policy, but the language is there.
Yep. Last couple items, ITA background checks agreement with LAPD. We're currently in a situation where every ITA employee, all 450, when hired, have to get an extensive LAPD background check. And that's been a very difficult situation. It comes from an MOA that was signed some time ago, in which the intent was for people who have access to what we call CLETS data should be able to go through this background check. That actually ends up being around 50 ITA employees, as well as their supervisors, which we're more than willing to subject to. But that has gotten shifted into a situation in which all IT employees are doing that, which leads to sometimes 2 to 3 month delays into our hiring process. We've just recently, in fact, lost about 3 or 4 new hires simply because they weren't interested in waiting, and we lost them to competitors. So we're working with the mayor's office and we're working with LAPD to bring it right back to the original intent, and that is for anybody who possibly can have access to what we call CLETS, true public safety sensitive data, as well as their supervisors. It includes folks like me. We're subject to those advanced background checks through LAPD. And so we're currently in those discussions. The last one, Data Science Federation, spring semester. Honestly, I'd like to thank the leadership of Councilmember Krikorian as well as Council President Wesson and others for pushing the discussion around data sciences and data analytics for the last couple of years. Subject to that, we ended up spinning up what we call a Data Science Federation. We now have, let me get this number right, over 12 university partners, and every semester we do whole sets of projects in which we take their master's level as well as undergrad level data science students, their capabilities, we match them with city problems and city subject matter experts. We are currently doing a dozen projects just as we speak. To give you a little taste of what the kinds of things we're looking at, in a partnership with our DOT, Great Streets, as well as Cal State University of Los Angeles, we're doing something where we do pedestrian and bicycle counting. Previously, DOT would take a 24-hour period to look at a video camera and count the number of pedestrians through that intersection or the number of bicycles through the intersection. The beauty is, based on things like machine vision, we don't have to do that. We can do an automated, near real-time count, and we're building out that proof of concept right now through Cal State LA, and that's providing a benefit to DOT. Another item has to do with prediction of displacement. Using various data sources from HCID and working with the mayor's I-team, we're identifying displacement scores around Los Angeles to predict the risk of displacement in certain time horizons. It allows HCID to be able to focus and target enforcement and their support around certain specific populations in certain specific locations. The intent from this perspective is to use data analysis to try to prevent homelessness. Another one has to do with what we call audit prediction values. The Department of Finance does around 2,500 to 3,000 audits a year. Some of them, as you can tell, and this is something that's certainly been very proven across the state and IRS and others, there are certain kinds of situations that an audit is much more warranted. It's warranted based on maybe the type of industry or the types of expected results, et cetera. And so this is providing a data analysis for Office of Finance to identify maybe the priority areas where they should audit, in which they expect to find non-compliance, and those areas in which they tend to find compliance, and so they can more often leave them alone. So it's simply using data analysis to provide additional insight into an operational department to try to help improve their types of operations. Just a few of many.
What are we hoping for the 311 analysis?
For the 311 analysis, that is getting insight into the types of requests are being made, and we're trying to look and identify. Here's maybe the best way to analyze it. Our 311 operators have a lot of good insight, but a lot of it's based on receiving all the various calls. What data analysis provides us is to be able to pull in 1.5 million requests a year and start to kind of churn it out. So we're expecting to find different ways that we maybe handle certain kinds of calls. We're going to be looking at certain fulfillment rates on types of calls, and we expect to kind of let the machines give us some insight where maybe we've been really missing the mark, because we tend to, as human beings, kind of sort and categorize things a certain way. So it's really something where we expect to find insight as to the types of requests and types of fulfillment we haven't met them before.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that analysis. When is all of that?
Spring semester.
Great. And then
For each of those schools, a little bit different, but by summer we should have all of our final reports, then we'll move into a fall semester.
And can they help also build the right dashboards?
Absolutely. The students love, sometimes they'll even do it on their own. They'll spin up an Amazon Web Services site. The students love to be able to take it where they're not just analyzing it, but they're helping provide that insight and then offer it up. So that's one of the main reasons why we at the IT agency like working with this. We're not just facilitating great insight and great analysis, but allows us to be able to result in tools that can improve the operations of those departments.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great program. Question not so much on this, but last year we talked about during the budget the cybersecurity and the transition of our phones to VoIP.
Yep.
Where are we on those projects?
Unfortunately, we were not funded. We tried to leverage some savings to try to get some of those projects started. So we have the first year of 3 submitted, and so we're working very hard with the mayor's office and CAO in regards to funding with those. We've been leveraging a little bit here, a little bit there. So Fig Plaza buildings, we went ahead and launched those. So we already got those on VoIP. We've done the same at Garland in some areas to make sure that we're trying out the technology and we're leveraging it. But by 2020, we're in a situation where AT&T and others said they'll no longer support traditional telephone lines, and we've got over 25,000 of them at the City of LA. So we're working very aggressively to get the funding and do replacements of those lines.
Okay, well, I'll save that. I assume that's something we'll talk about in budget, that it's,
yep.
You guys are trying to bake it in. Any additional questions, colleagues? Yeah.
Just really quick, Ted, sure. I'm just was curious to know why you didn't include 311 on your top 10 priority list. I think, are you confident that it's working well? Or maybe it's your 11th item to improve and continue to work with My 311 app, 311?
The top 10 is always difficult for me.
Yeah.
We literally have like 200 to 300 ongoing projects.
Sure.
And so there's always the level of difficulty of figuring out what comes in. So what I often do is I take what's in the next month has some kind of maybe big push. So it tends to filter into the conversation. 311 is always one. We have what we call the 311 2.0 project, in which we're working towards elected officials, animal services, Department of Transportation. So that's off, and we've kicked that one off. We're always stabilizing. We're always refining. We're always trying to make it more usable and easy. We're always trying to analyze how people are using it and how maybe they're not using it, if they're frustrated with it. And we're always reading through all the feedback in regards to ways to make improvements.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's a perennial top 10.
Appreciate you bringing us the top 10. It's always insightful and helps us get a better sense of where you guys are going. And we appreciate the good work that you're doing. We have 3 public comment cards. Let the record show Mr. Herman, Pepita Pig, and Antonio Ramirez are not here. So public comment on this item is closed. And is there anything else on the docket?
No, Mr. Chair.
Great. This meeting's adjourned.